Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the Tyler Perry film A Fall from Grace as suggested by these lovely subscribers here. So starting off, we have Jasmine Bryant. She's married to Jordan, who is a cop. Jasmine herself is a lawyer, works as a public defender. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a lawyer that is appointed to you by the court if you can't afford one on your own. The firm that Jasmine works for is very underfunded, so their main goal is to get cases in and out as quickly as possible because, like I said, they don't have the funds, the time, and the resources to be able to really cater to their defendants. Jasmine is assigned a high-profile case by her boss, who is Rory, who is played by Tyler Perry. So the case that she's assigned to is the Grace Waters case, and like I said, it's high profile, so the media has latched onto it, and essentially, Grace is on trial for the murder of her husband. Jasmine is assigned to this case specifically to get a plea deal because, like I said, their office is underfunded, so the goal is to get her in and out. Grace had already admitted to killing her husband and is also wanting to plead guilty. So Jasmine meets Grace and their first interaction is very brief. Grace makes it clear that she wants to plead guilty. The only thing that she asks is to be moved to a prison close enough for her son and grandson to be able to visit her. And immediately, I don't like Grace. Like I said, she made it very clear that she wanted to plead guilty, but for some reason she seemed very judgmental or hesitant of Jasmine because of Jasmine's age and even questions her education, which it's like, you don't need a fancy schmancy lawyer if you're gonna plead guilty anyways. And not to mention her struggle ponytail. And I get that she's in jail and that she's, going through a lot right now. So I don't expect her ponytail to have been like stylish, but at least let it be functional. Like, it's not like it was keeping anything out of her face. Like, if from the front, you would think that, oh, her hair is down. It's not, there's not going to be a ponytail back there. And then bam, there's a ponytail back there doing nothing. And that probably is because of the awful wig that she was wearing, but we are talking about a Tyler Perry movie, so I don't think anybody is surprised by this. So after meeting with Grace, Jasmine is surprised by Grace's demeanor. She says she seems like a normal person. She's very calm and relaxed. Grace herself doesn't have any priors, like any prior anything. She's never had a traffic ticket. She's like a model citizen. She feeds the homeless. She teaches Sunday school. So she's like very confused how she ended up in the current situation that she's in. And at some point, Donnie, who is Jasmine's coworker, says that Grace would make a good defendant and that Jasmine should consider defending her as opposed to taking a plea deal. But Jasmine kind of rebuttals and says that the evidence is overwhelming, which, mind you, they say this a lot throughout the movie, that there's an insane amount of evidence against Grace, and I just want you to keep that in mind. So Jasmine gets the plea deal from the DA, or from the district attorney, and they're asking that Grace be sentenced to prison for life with no parole. So Jasmine relays this onto her and she sees that Grace starts crying, and that leads her to believe that Grace is innocent. You see Jasmine's energy kind of shift from wanting to take the plea deal to wanting to help Grace. Initially, Jasmine advises Grace not to go to trial in fear of her getting the death penalty, but now that she feels that Grace is innocent, she kind of goes the extra mile to try to prove her innocence. So first, Jasmine interviews Grace's friend Sarah. So when Jasmine visits Sarah, we find out that Sarah is a caretaker for elderly women. We also get some background information about Grace and her husband. So we find out that Grace's ex-husband left her and remarried his younger mistress, and younger being just a few years older than their son. Kind of flashback to this conversation that Grace and Sarah are having about Grace feeling lonely and wanting her youth back and wanting to be loved and wanting to give love, which is like completely valid. What I just don't like about the movie is how they kind of played Grace out a little bit. I get the point that they were trying to make. Besides her shitty wig, Grace was like beautiful and not old. So I kind of hate that they made her seem like, oh, I'm just an old woman all alone in my lighthouse. I don't know, maybe they casted the wrong person. Like, the actress herself did an amazing job, but it was just kind of hard for me to view her as this almost lonely damsel. Jasmine has this newfound determination. She starts looking into the case. So she's looking at the blood spatter patterns and notices that it doesn't really align with the prosecutor's case. I found this particularly interesting because she has this information, pertinent information, that may prove Grace's innocence or may like it's like a puzzle piece in proving Grace's innocence. So she presents it to her boss, Rory, and is basically saying that she wants to hire a blood spatter analyst to make sense of the blood patterns. Rory declines and says that they can't afford that, which is like, it's not the office's fault that they're underfunded, but oh my gosh, how terrible is that? That if you can't afford a good lawyer or a lawyer that has resources to help you, like that's just kind of what you're stuck with. Like this was information that could have helped her case, but they couldn't help with that because they couldn't afford to. And I don't know if this is how it is like in real life, like if all public defenders firms are underfunded, but in this instance they were. And I feel like that would be a very unfortunate thing where if the only way that you can get off on a case is if you have a lot of money. And because of that, I think it's really nice that there are lawyers, like fancy schmancy lawyers, that take cases pro bono. If I were Jasmine, I would encourage Grace to contact her son and to get her a lawyer with more resources that's able to help her win her case. Because if there's any ounce of innocence or if there's any ounce of evidence that can work in her favor, they can't explore that evidence because of lack of resources, that's kind of unfair to me. So Jasmine meets with Grace again, and we get even more background information about Grace and not her ex-husband, but her current husband, who has said to have been murdered. So we're in another flashback as Grace is recalling how she met her husband, Shannon. Grace's friend Sarah encourages her to go to an art gallery. So Grace goes to the art gallery, and that's where she meets Shannon.
Ow, jump scare.
And let's get it out the way. The wig was awful, okay? Let's look at it. Just what the fuck was going on? And the crazy part is the actor himself is handsome, and I feel like they could have just gone without. It was so unnecessary. It wasn't necessary at all. And this is why I feel like Tyler Perry has to be trolling when he does stuff like this, because it's like the first few movies that he came out with, okay, sure, but it's like you're established now. Like either get a wig specialist or just don't do it at all. Like the dude literally didn't. There was no reason for the dude to have a wig. Grace's was already bad enough, but the high top was just disrespectful. So anyways, Grace and Shannon were having some good conversation, and we find out that Shannon's photographs are being displayed in the art gallery, and that's what the whole event was about, was him and his photographs. And before they can finish their conversation, or before they can even properly exchange names, Grace leaves. So the next day, Grace goes into work, and Shannon has sent her a photograph that he's taken, a rose, and a card with his phone number asking to take her out on a date. And to each their own, you know, that may be romantic to some, but I'm just a little bit too weary for all of that. Like that seems like a bit much. The way that I see it, if I'm talking to somebody and they leave without telling me their name, without saying goodbye, without saying a word to me, I'm gonna assume that they're not interested. So if I'm in the reverse position, I'm like, bro, clearly I'm not interested. But for whatever reason, Grace was flattered by this and ultimately decides to go on the date. She's hesitant at first, but her friend Sarah is like really encouraging her to go. So we're now flashback to Shannon and Grace's first date, and this scene especially pisses me off. So one, you have Grace who says something on the lines of, "Oh, I bet you've talked to a bunch of young pretty women. Why would you choose me?" Which is like, ew, girl, stand up. Like, how are you gonna sit across from that fucking ridiculous ass high top and say some shit like that? Like, it just gave off very insecure, and it just frustrated me so much. And she does explain that her divorce did make her question herself, and that is completely understandable. But like I said, it was just an insecure thing to say, and it was a little weird too, because I wonder what kind of man it would have taken for her to be like, yes me, and not why me. And truthfully, I think it might have been a little bit too soon for her to start dating after her divorce. I think she would have benefited from being alone for a while to reestablish what makes her her and what makes her worth loving. Because determining your value on whether or not somebody else loves you can be a slippery slope, especially if they fall short on showing you love and respect in your relationship. Like, I see this a lot with people who have been cheated on, and it may be like, I don't know, like, I don't want to say a trauma response, like a mental response where you're trying to make sense of why something had happened. And I feel oftentimes we look into ourselves internally to figure out what went wrong. They blame themselves and really hone in on their insecurities. But really, I feel like it's a little bit more complicated than that, especially because oftentimes when people cheat, it has nothing to do with the person that they're cheating on. It usually has something to do with their own whatever they got going on. And I think it is a natural response, especially if somebody that's like maybe a little bit too self-aware, to kind of think back and say, okay, what did I do wrong? How did this lead to this? And I do think that it's a natural response, but it just requires like time and reflection. And I think Grace definitely needed that time to reflect on her husband having an affair and reflect on herself in a way, allow her to see that she's somebody that's worth loving. Because in the great words of Mother Rue, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you gonna love anybody else? And then there's another thing that Grace does on the date that kind of irked me a little bit. She admits that she walked in on her husband having sex with his secretary, who's now his wife. And I have multiple thoughts on this. There's part of me that feels that she should not have shared that with him. There was this post I seen, and this girl was saying not to tell the man that you're currently dating how bad your previous relationship was or previous relationships were, because he'll use that as a measure of what you're willing to put up with. And I do have mixed feelings about that because that is something that happened to me in a relationship. So part of me is always hesitant on sharing previous details of previous relationships with anybody that I'm dating. However, I do think that it's important to share that type of stuff with your partner. And I don't think that it should be one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm not going to tell this person because they're going to use it against me. But it's like, at the same time, I don't want to be with somebody that is going to use my past and my past relationships against me. I would want them to say, wow, like that guy sounds terrible. Let me do better, and not go, what an ex did to me. Literally. Okay, quick story time. I had an ex who had problematic tendencies, and when I brought it up, it was like, hey, like, you know, when you do this, it kind of makes you feel uncomfortable. He literally said, well, at least I don't insert what I confided him about for my previous relationship. I was gagged and I left because what the fuck? Because in actuality, I feel it's important to be able to share that type of thing with your partner. Personally, I would want to know if some crazy stuff went down in my ex's relationship that could potentially impact our relationship. I do think that you should go into a relationship as healed as possible, but the reality is sometimes we're not 100% healed, sometimes we're a little jaded, and I feel if you confide in the right person, they're going to nurture that and rebuild that trust, or take the time to build that trust with you. And it's not going to be this thing of, okay, like you tolerated this in your last relationship, so I'm gonna do everything but. Which is an insane way of thinking, but like that's how some people are. So Grace and Shannon continue to date. They are 3 months into dating and they haven't had sex, which I thought was really cool. And Grace does make a point to say that every time it felt like their relationship was moving too fast, her friend Sarah would, you know, encourage her to continue on with the relationship. So Shannon, after 3 months, proposes to Grace and she accepts and they finally have sex. But back to that point, I kind of feel like, no. And I've never been in a situation where after 3 months, I was like, wow, I could marry this person. Like, I feel like after 3 months, we're barely breaking solid ground. And I guess there are people that do just click like that, where if they vibe well enough, it feels like they've known each other their whole lives and they're able to just, you know, do that. So halfway through the flashback, Grace stops retelling the story and just randomly starts reading Jasmine for filth and starts talking about how Jasmine doesn't defend, but she pleads and encourages the defendants to plea and take a deal instead of actually defending them, which I get that, but it's like, you know, they sent her to you for a reason. You're prepared to plead guilty. And now, you know, it seems that everybody has changed their mind on that. By everybody, I mean Grace and Jasmine are exploring the idea of proving her innocence. So it's like, you can't really fault her for that. She is known for, you know, getting plea deals. And that was her whole point of being there, because Grace had already decided that she wanted to plead guilty. But Jasmine assures Grace that she wants to help and she feels in her heart that she's innocent and wants to prove her innocence. So Grace continues on with her story, and Shannon and Grace get married and they're living a happy life together. He caters to her and they're loving, they're vibing, everything's great until things take a turn for the worse. At nighttime, Grace is in bed. She notices that Shannon isn't there. So she goes downstairs and Shannon is on the phone and he's having a very quiet conversation and he's talking about fireflies, and it's like it's vague where we don't really know what's going on. So Grace comes downstairs and she's like, who are you on the phone with? And He like kind of ignores her, was like, hey, I'm gonna call you back later. And then as soon as Shannon gets off the phone, she asks again, who are you on the phone with? And Shannon like gets very defensive. He tells her, I don't like being checked up on, and I don't like being questioned either. And she was just like, damn, like, you know, my bad. And they kind of move on from there. So this is something that's on her mind through the next day. She's at work thinking about it. And Grace is called into a meeting with her bosses and upper management because there's a significant amount of money missing from the accounts that she's handling. And mind you, Grace works at a bank. The amount that was missing was over $300,000. And they fire her just on the spot, which I think that that was kind of dumb, only because I feel like they should have did a further investigation and looked up an IP address, found out when the money was taken and how everything went down, because her boss did say that whoever took the money, which they assumed just off rip that it was Grace, and I get why, because it was using her credentials, her logins, her passwords, but who would be dumb enough to move money using their information? Like, and I think that they should have had a bigger conversation, but honestly, like, I mean, it was what it was. So she's blowing up Shannon's phone. He doesn't answer. He gets home, and immediately she confronts him about the phone conversation he had the night prior, which I don't know if that would be on the top of my list if I had just gotten fired from my job based off of an accusation, a false accusation at that. I don't think that that would have been my first point of conversation is, hey, who were you on the phone with last night? So she confronts him about this, and then he's like, he pulls out some photos, and he's like,
I was doing a photo shoot with kids for cancer, and I was on the phone with their nurse last night, and she's 60 years old.
And basically tries to make Grace look bad or make her seem unreasonable for being suspicious, which I don't think she was unreasonable. Like, why are you talking to their nurse at an odd hour of the night? And maybe it's a night shift nurse that it was supposed to be, I don't know. But he was like making it seem like he was doing something special for her. So she feels guilty. She apologizes and explains what happened at her job. Shannon is trying to help her. Like, they're both making phone calls to different credit card companies and trying to figure out what happened, because she suspects that her identity was stolen. She even calls the police at some point, and they said that there's nothing that they can do. So as I mentioned, she suspects that her identity has been stolen, so she goes to her bank and she finds out that she's 30 days behind on a mortgage payment. Mind you, her house has been paid off for 4 years now. Her account is overdrawn, and the mortgage that was taken out was over $300,000. And I feel like in instances like that, where somebody clearly already has their house paid off and they take out another mortgage, I think that there needs to be more confirmation. There needs to be a bigger conversation and something like that, because they had documents and her signature on it, and it was just a mess. Like, her house is facing foreclosure because she hasn't made payment. So she has video surveillance of Shannon going to her bank and kind of makes a connection that he was the one that took out another mortgage on the house. So she confronts him about this, shows him the video. Shannon admits it and basically says that he owes people money, and again starts to try to guilt trip her and is like, we're husband and wife. I thought you would want to help me. There's a difference between receiving help from your significant other, voluntary help from your significant other, and going behind their back and doing some crazy shit like that. So that being said, Grace also makes the connection that Shannon stole money from her job. And so she tells him like, hey, you need to get that money back. You need to give me my money back. And he's like, no, I'm your husband, so I'm entitled to that money. And at this point, I really wanted Grace to, like, I don't know, record this conversation and figure something out, especially dealing with her job. But it's like, granted, she didn't come to the realization that he had stolen money from her job until she confronted him there on the spot. So from this point forward, Shannon becomes unhinged and just rude, just straight up mean to Grace. She tries calling the cops to have him removed from her house, but the cops say that it's a civil matter, so there's nothing that they can do. She tries to find a lawyer, but the lawyer is too expensive because, mind you, he like wiped out all of her money and all of her bank account. And that being said, I was confused why she didn't like flip the switch on him and do the same thing to him. Like, I don't know if she just didn't have access to find his money, but I'm like, I'm sure he had to have left a wallet laying around, something to where she could have did the same thing to him and got her money back. But he also said that the money, that he couldn't give the money back because the money was gone. Like, I don't know if he actually owed somebody or was just flat out like swindling her. She gets back home and walks in on Shannon hooking up with a younger woman, which I know this triggered her given her last relationship and how everything ended with her ex-husband. So she goes into the room screaming and yelling and upset, which is, you know, completely valid. Like, that's a lot. Like, hooking up in her bed is wild. And the girl that Shannon is hooking up with is way too calm for my liking. And at some point she was like, oh my God, you brought me to your mom's house? Like, even if you thought that that was his mom and that was his mom's house, like, are you not alarmed that she just bursted in yelling and stuff? Like, that's terrifying. I would immediately assume that she was gonna leave and come back with a weapon of sorts. So Grace is just shook at this point. She's just sitting down in the kitchen and Shannon walks the girl out and the girl is like like laughing and stuff, like, oh my God, that was amazing. Oh my God, like, is your mom gonna bust in on us again? Like, huh? So after the girl leaves, Shannon is sitting down, Grace is sitting down, and she asks again, can't give me my money back. Like, I'm about to be arrested. I'm about to be charged because, mind you, her job is under the impression that she stole that money. She's about to lose her house. Like, there's a lot going on. So she asked him, she was like, can I have my money back? Like, give me my money back. And then Shannon goes on his villainous ass monologue talking about how he deserved the money because he added sex and excitement into her life. And I feel like, and this is what I mean, I feel like this goes back to the conversation that they previously had on their first date, where she made it seem like she was just this like lonely person that couldn't, like, and I don't know, I don't like the idea of getting with somebody and then making them feel like they're doing me any favors, huh? Like, and I wouldn't want to go on a date with somebody that felt like I was doing them any favors. Like, it's supposed to be a mutual thing, and I don't think anybody should ever feel like that when they're dating. It's one thing to be like, oh my God, I'm so lucky I met this person, I'm so lucky I have them, they treat me so well, and then it's another thing completely to be like, oh, you want to date me? Like, it just, ugh. Like, he's all high and mighty with his ugly ass high top talking about some
I brought sex and excitement to your boring life.
and here's this thing again where they take a dig at Grace's age, and he says because of her age she's low-hanging fruit and she's old and lonely and weak. So in the midst of his monologue, Grace grabs a bat and just Jackie Robinson's, okay? Babe Ruth. And this scene was like especially crazy because I felt like there was just like too much blood given the circumstance. Like, you would have thought she wasn't hitting him with a bat, but she was hitting him with a machete. Like, how much blood was happening in that moment. So she drags his unconscious body to the basement, gets in her car, and drives off. So Grace calls Sarah. Sarah goes to the house, calls Grace back to let her know that there is no body. Remember all that overwhelming evidence that they were talking about, and there was no fucking body? No face, no case, no body, no... You know what I mean? There's no body, there's no, like, crime. Jasmine also seems surprised by this. They're back out of the reverie. They're back out of Grace's flashback, and now they're present day, and Jasmine is like, there's no body, so he lived. And Grace is like, no, I know he's dead. How? His body was gone. For all we know, he could have walked up and left about that bitch. Sorry. And it's like, I don't mean to get irritated, but it's like, huh? like, are you kidding me? You were willing to spend life in prison after you heard that his body wasn't there? This is crazy. So after receiving this information, Jasmine goes and confronts Sarah because Sarah definitely left all of that information out. And that was such important information. And so Sarah says, yes, when she got there, there was no body, but she did see Grace's son there. And so she alludes to Malcolm, Grace's son, removing the body for Grace. So how Sarah explains it, as she's driving past the house, Malcolm is driving away from the house, and she was like, he just looked frustrated and irritated. Jasmine comes to the conclusion that Grace wants to plead guilty in order to protect her son, because if he's involved somehow, he could be implicated and he could probably get arrested. And it didn't help either that she refused to see her son while in jail awaiting sentencing. So right now, I'm going to tell you how the trial plays out, and then I'm going to tell you what they should have done completely differently. So the trial is happening. Jasmine is adamant on having Sarah take the stand. She wants to raise reasonable doubt. By doing so, she wants to ask Sarah if she murdered Shannon. Grace gets upset, and she doesn't like this idea at all. And she's like, that's my friend, and if you pull her on that stand and incriminate her, I'm going to get up and scream that I'm guilty. And Grace just like was frustrating the fuck out of me. Let me rephrase. Let me calm down. And Grace just irritated me because I'm like, act like you have something to live for. So Sarah takes a stand and Jasmine basically asks her questions about Grace's character. And so Sarah just raves about how she's a good person, this, that, and the third. But then the prosecutor goes to question Sarah and he brings up the phone records. And of course, the phone records have caught that Grace called Sarah the night of Shannon's murder. And then Sarah called Grace from Grace's house so they could ping her location. At this point, Sarah has lied about how long they were on the phone. What she did after she got off the phone with her the first time, she said that she went to bed, but the phone record shows she called from Grace's house. So Jasmine objects because she says that they haven't received this piece of evidence. And if you're familiar with any type of court or jury business, both the prosecutor and the defender needs to have the same evidence so it can be reviewed in rebuttal or address the evidence however they want to address it. And so Jasmine is like, there is no evidence of this. Like, we didn't receive this. And the prosecutor did submit that evidence, but she just didn't notice, which I'm like, as soon as she found out that the phone call happened, she should have looked for it in the evidence, because why wouldn't the prosecutor use that information? But she's not dumb. It's her first trial, so it's like you can't get mad at her. And she was like scrambling, trying to get all this information and stuff. So it's like we can't be mad at her. But I was just like, I really wish she would have done that. And under the pressure, Sarah admits that Grace confessed to Shannon's murder. So Rory is in the courtroom and proceeds to lecture Jasmine and tells her like he's been monitoring her and shadowing her the entire trial, which I'm like, you're gonna shadow her the entire trial but not say anything, but not give her any guidance? Because he says like, oh yeah, I knew about the phone calls, but I didn't say anything. And it's like, you 100% should have said something. If you have the time to shadow somebody and watch their every step, you have time to jump in and be like, just a quick little tidbit, make sure you got this covered, or hey, what information do you have so far? Like, he could have been a mentor and guided her and just totally didn't and just watched her fail. I won't say Jasmine failing was inevitable. We hope for an underdog story, but in reality, that was her very first trial. There's a lot of pressure. It's high profile. And the trial, she had, I think it was like 3 weeks that they had to prepare. And it's a lot of information to receive and to defend. And it just wasn't enough time going from, okay, this is going to be a simple plea deal to, okay, I'm going to like full on defend this person in court. So it's like, I get her perspective. I just wish Rory would have jumped in and helped. But one thing I do agree with Rory, as soon as Sarah folded under the pressure and said, Grace told me that she murdered Shannon, she kind of just left it at that instead of backpedaling and being like, okay, let me question her again. Because if that's the last thing that the jury hears, like it was open and shut, it's done. And I think she should have went back and been like, okay, so we established that you were there. When you got there, there was no body, right? Like, okay, so he got up and left, right? I'd like, Grace isn't a medical examiner. Okay, she doesn't know, maybe she was under the pressure and didn't realize like he was actually alive. Like she probably had her adrenaline running. Like there are so many ways that she could have handled it. She probably wouldn't have been able to say it just like that, because you can't really allude to anything whenever you're questioning somebody. You're supposed to just question them and ask a question. But like she could have led it to that. There could have been a way for her to lead her questioning with Sarah to circle back to Grace's innocence. So the next day in court, it's closing statements, and Jasmine is adamant on having Sarah take the stand again. And the judge flat out tells her, like, I'm not going to allow that. The time to do that was yesterday. It's closing statements today. Like, no. So she's just very persistent on it. And she's like basically arguing back and forth with the judge, trying to get Sarah on the stand. He holds her in contempt. And then she's sent to like the little jail that they have in the courthouse. And Grace is found guilty of all charges. And as Grace is leaving the courtroom, she sees Sarah, and Sarah is wearing one of Shannon's necklaces. Bum, bum, bum. Yes, that's right. Sarah was an op the entire time. The friend that she was trying so badly to protect was an op the whole time. And Grace is having all these creepy flashbacks of Sarah, and it's like scenes that we've previously seen, but now it feels a little bit more sinister because she's looking at them differently, and it's kind of recalling things that were strange in Sarah's behavior that would make sense to her helping Shannon scam her. So Jasmine does not know this information at this point. And so Jasmine goes to visit Sarah just to console her about her friend being sentenced to life in prison. Jordan, Jasmine's husband, drops her off like halfway before he goes to work, and Jasmine starts walking to Sarah's house. And on her way there, she sees one of Sarah's tenants, who is literally the iconic Cicely Tyson. So Cicely, which, forgive me, I do not know her name in the film, but we're just gonna call her by her government name. So Cicely is trying to go back to her house, and that's what she keeps telling Jasmine. She's like, I want to go back to my house. I want to go back to my house. So Jasmine thinks that she's confused and disoriented and just a weary old woman who's unaware of her surroundings. And so she tries taking her back to Sarah's house, and she takes her back to Sarah's house, and Cicely reveals to Jasmine, like, she's been holding us hostage here, and there's others here, and there was a photographer named Shannon that Cicely tells Jasmine about that jumped from the roof. So at this point, we can confirm that Shannon, the one with the high top, not the one that jumped on the roof, stole Shannon's identity. We meet the real Shannon in like the first 2 minutes of the movie, and she jumps off of a house, which we now can confirm is Sarah's house. So Jasmine starts exploring the house. She goes into the basement. There are women shackled. Before she can even react or do anything, Shannon, the one with the high top, grabs her. Can you imagine if it was the ghost of the Shannon that jumped off the roof? Leave this house. No, it's Shannon with the high top. He grabs her, ties her up. We find out that Shannon is Sarah's son. So while all this is happening, Jordan is working, being a cop. He gets a tip from dispatch about Sarah. Sarah has a criminal record. Like, we don't really get to see exactly what it is, but she's like, shows her picture in the rooms with like the lines behind them and stuff. Oh my God, I'm an idiot. It shows her mugshot photo is what I'm trying to say. Bear with me. It's like 3 a.m. But he sees her mugshot photo and knows that his wife, Jasmine, went to her house. So he pulls up to the house, and Sarah answers the door, and she's like, oh, she's not here. He tries to go in. She's like, you don't have a warrant. You can't come in here. And so he calls Jasmine's phone, hears the phone ringing inside, and just busts in. He cuffs Sarah after they tussle, goes to the basement, finds Jasmine. She's all tied up, and then has a tussle with Shannon, and they're tussling. Jordan drops his gun. Jasmine is able to get out of her restraints, grabs a gun, and shoots Shannon. This leads us to find out the real identities of Sarah and Shannon. So Shannon is actually Maurice Mills, and Sarah is actually Betty Mills. They find out that they've been running a scam where they get middle-aged women, which is like, if you look at the women that were in the basement, it looked like they just got like women of all sorts of ages and then put like a gray wig on them, and I was like, they're old and defenseless. So Grace is released and deemed innocent since she was a scam victim herself. Betty, or as we know her as Sarah, ends up getting away and continues to scam older people. That's kind of how the movie ends. Now to how I would have handled it as somebody with zero law experience, but who watches a lot of crime videos. I watch a lot of interrogation tapes. I read a lot of crime books, okay? And so here is my unprofessional opinion of how they should have handled everything. So first off, they tried to plead completely innocent in the trial, when I think what they should have done was just tell the truth about how everything played out. Because there was too much evidence that alluded to a physical altercation that I don't think that they would have been able to avoid. And it's like you see during the trial that they try to combat it. Like, for example, there's like a massive pool of blood in Grace's basement, and Jasmine is asking like the blood analyst that the prosecutor has, and is like, oh, that could be blood from a long time ago, right? It could be blood accumulated over time, right? But it's like an insane amount of blood. Like, it just didn't hold up solid. So I think that they should have been honest about the progression of everything, including how Shannon was scamming Grace. And I think Grace should have taken the stand and recalled the entire interaction between her and Shannon leading up to that point. Because one, what that would have done is built some rapport with the jury if they heard her speaking and telling her story and how ultimately she was a scam victim. In a way, be able to sympathize with her, see her as a person and not a cold-blooded killer that they've been saying that she was in the trial. And more importantly, they could have, if they would have recalled everything step by step, she did beat him with a bat, yes, okay. She did put his unconscious body in a basement. She did call her friend Sarah, who confirmed that he was not there when she got back, which means he got up and left. And the whole thing with her son too, they didn't even have to implicate her son because there was no reason to implicate her son. If the prosecutor didn't submit evidence that her son was there and the main focus was Grace, they could have left it at that. Nobody was going to question her son. Nobody was going to say anything, and they could have left it at that. Not once during the trial did Malcolm, Grace's son, take the stand. So they really could have worked with that and also left her son completely out of it and just stuck with the facts, because she's on trial for murder and you can't murder somebody, or you didn't murder somebody, if they got up and left. Even if that was an issue, I feel like Jasmine should have put in a little bit more effort and spoken to Malcolm and tried to see if he maybe had an alibi, maybe Sarah was mistaken. And like I said, even if that wasn't the case, even if he was there, they should have, because Sarah already was lying on the stand, talking about some, oh, I went after bed after we got off the phone. What would it have hurt for her to just leave out that she seen her son there, that she seen Grace's son there? And if the prosecutors came back and said, well, he survived, why didn't he report the beating? Easy. He's a scammer and a con artist, so him getting involved with law enforcement wouldn't be beneficial towards him at all. So it makes sense why he would just scram and leave the scene. And I feel like they would have also eventually found out that he was operating under a false identity. They also could have submitted video surveillance of him at her bank, and also the multiple attempts that she tried to get the police involved in her situation. Even finesse the phone conversation too between Sarah and Grace, and she could have been like, yes, I beat him and I was scared that he was gonna wake up and be mad, so I hit him in the basement and I ran for my life. Something, I don't know, because it's like they have the phone call records. They don't have exactly what was discussed in that phone call. Jasmine could have coached Sarah for when she got on the stand to kind of like move the evidence in their favor. And I feel like they should have just had a whole different defense, because what they were currently working with, trying to prove that she was 110% innocent, was not good. And if she did eventually go on trial for beating up Shannon, I know that that would be way less time than, you know, life without parole. But yeah, that's just me. That's all that I have for you today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you later. Bye.